Hello, PAX Online. Welcome to our panel today. We are happy to be hosting Session 0 Critical Conversations. My name is Elizabeth Kilmer. I am a clinical psychologist and the Director of Education and Training for Game to Grow. Game to Grow is a 501c3 nonprofit where we use games of all kinds to promote educational, personal, and community growth. We are best known for our tabletop role-playing games using Dungeons & Dragons that are therapeutic social skills groups, but we also run groups kind of across the age spectrum. We also offer individual counseling, and we are launching a comprehensive training program for therapeutic GMs that will kick off on October 3rd. If you have any questions about that or you'd like to join our mailing list, I would invite you to check out www.gametogrow.org. I'm going to let my amazing panelists introduce themselves.
Hi everyone, my name is Bhavika Parmar. I'm a national certified counselor and I'm a licensed professional counselor intern supervised by Beth Coles. I currently work at a private practice called Uplift Counseling Services in Allen, Texas, which is where I work with kiddos and teens. And then I also work for a nonprofit called Chetna, which is where I serve as a domestic violence counselor, and I specifically work with the South Asian population at this nonprofit.
Very cool. My name is Shauna Spain. You can find me online with the handle like7spoon. The number is spelled out. I am not a clinician at all, but I do run a bunch of games. I'm currently running 3 campaigns, 2 of which are streamed. I'm a player in a couple of others, and then I run these one-shots where I introduce new players to Dungeons & Dragons. I'm also doing a weird storytelling experiment on Sundays because I like D&D.
Yeah.
I am disabled. I am autistic and an ambulatory wheelchair user. I am normally accompanied by a service animal, which you don't get to see today because we're talking on the line.
Absolutely. Thank you for those.
Also,
more things.
I am the Game to Grow volunteer coordinator.
You are the Game to Grow volunteer coordinator and our unofficial but amazing tech support through all of these things. So thank you so much for coming today, y'all. Today what we're going to be talking about is Session 0. We're going to be talking about what is a Session 0, what content is covered in a Session 0, what the heck are safety tools, and why would you need them in a game. We're also going to talk a little bit about how that looks differently for different populations in different kinds of settings. So all 3 of us run games, but we run games in different places so that the way that we use these tools are going to look a little bit different. Quick disclaimer before we start, we're not teaching you to be therapists. We're just not. Don't therapize your friends. If you want to come to a training on how to run these groups, we offer those at Game to Grow. You should come to one of those. But this does not give you any kind of permission to go therapize your friends. However, you can use a lot of the tools that we're going to be talking about today to communicate better with your party, to communicate better with the people around your table, to make sure that you are actually all on the same page so that you want to keep playing games with each other. So as we kind of kick that off, my first question for y'all, we're going to do kind of a roundtable thing, is what is a Session 0?
So, for me, a Session 0 is what happens before the party actually starts to do anything. And so you can do all kinds of things in the Session 0. Like often if you talk to other GMs that don't know what a Session 0 is, but you say, well, did you sit down with your players and figure out like what they were all playing together? Like, did you do that all at the same time and maybe work in a little bit of like, maybe some of them knew each other ahead of time and like work out some of the secrets you wanted to sprinkle through? And they go, yeah, I did that. It's like, cool, that's part of your Session 0. What I tend to do with it is to lay down a lot of the ground rules. So in my games, I'm a storytelling GM, so I like to do collaborative storytelling. I'm not out to get my players, which often shocks them. And I don't appreciate them being out to get me. And so I lay that out. I also don't memorize the rule books. So I've had people bow out of my campaigns because that's not the game for them. They wanted combat-heavy games, and I don't run combat-heavy games. They wanted all of the rules as written. I don't run my games like that. And it's better to find that out in a Session 0 than to be 30 sessions in and be like, why am I miserable? I don't like being miserable. I'm supposed to be doing this for fun. And then hating somebody. That's the worst. So get it out there at the beginning.
Absolutely. Yeah, I think with session 0, oftentimes our main goal is to get on the same page, right? Because the idea is you want to outline like what is the purpose of this game. Maybe the purpose is having fun. Maybe the purpose is relaxing. Maybe the purpose is like getting like flexing our storytelling muscles. Maybe the purpose is like I just want to fight things all the time. Maybe that purpose is therapeutic. Maybe it's around social skills. Maybe it's around identity development. Maybe it is around dealing with kind of past trauma or anxiety or depression. But if you and your players are not on the same page, it's going to be very, very challenging to have to meet any of your goals.
I had somebody come to me and they were like, I want to play an ADHD character. And I said, what about, why? What about that makes sense to you? And they were like, well, I might have ADHD and I kind of want to play through that. And I was like, awesome. I'm not a therapist. I'm not going to diagnose you with ADHD. If you can tell me some mechanics that you want to use that for flavor, but if you just want to say squirrel all the time, like, what does this look like? And if we hadn't had that conversation, it would have gotten really awkward, you know? And I set aside time in the session 0s to talk about that. I talk about how I don't, nobody that attacks you is going to have gone insane due to some physical trauma that left them crippled. I will not be doing that in my game, and I would appreciate it if you don't do that either. It protects people, you know. It keeps situations from happening. Another thing I do is orcs are not inherently bad. I don't take entire races of people and make them evil. That doesn't work in my world. And I was in a session 0 very recently, and somebody had to change their backstory. But because I'd explained why, right? Like I don't appreciate the racial divides in real life, and I certainly don't want it in my game. And there's no real reason for it. It doesn't take the fun out. So I was able to work with that player on figuring out a way that entire race of people hadn't, wasn't her opposition. It was more of a we found a better storyline where, I don't remember what it was. Maybe it was a group of orcs, but it wasn't the entire race. It was just this one, group of 4 orcs or something like that. That's another thing that would have been good, because if we'd gotten 10 sessions in and then she revealed her dark past, and it would have been really hard for me to be like, nope, session 10, like, no, I don't like it. It's not fun.
Absolutely. So it sounds like, Shona, you do like a session 0, which is that like all the players in one place at one time? Like this is officially like this is the session that we have before session 1. Do you meet one-on-one with your players? What does that look like?
It depends. So right now we're all online, and so I recently started up a game during COVID, and we streamed that, I think we streamed the session 0. I think.
Is this the game I was in? Because yes, we did.
Yeah, so that's right. I did it on purpose so I could point at it. Yes, I did stream a live session 0. But I also use Discord heavily. So I've got private channels with each of my characters, and I was able to use those, each of my players, I was able to use those to ask certain questions about their characters, and to have back channels. So if somebody is like, if I give a note to somebody, I'm like, do you read it to the party? And they're like, no, I keep it to myself. I send it to them in a back channel. But it also gives me a place to be like, somebody picked up a turtle recently, and they were like, I want it to like have actions and things, and I was like, well, let's talk about that. So instead of doing that at the table, I was able to do that more offline. So that can be helpful. I've had players come to me and be like, I just need to talk at you for an hour. It's like, great. It depends on what the player needs. If the player wants to write you a novel and that doesn't work for you, maybe in the session 0 being like, I love your novel. It's amazing, but it doesn't work for me. Can you give me some bite sizes? That's where you end up compromising. But yeah, I try to get everybody together at least once before the session starts to prove that that's the time we're all going to meet every week.
Mm-hmm.
Every week we're going to meet at this time, and to let everybody get to know each other, because it's very rare that I put a group together that everybody knows each other.
Okay. So it sounds like an alternate goal of a session 0 for you is making sure that like everyone is actually capable of showing up at the time intended.
Yeah.
I love that. Yeah. Yeah. So Bhavika, I think you and I might do at least our therapeutic session 0s a little bit more the same, where they might not look exactly like the traditional, this is where we're meeting for an hour or 2 hours. Can you tell me a little bit about that? What that looks like for you?
So for me, specifically, I have done it obviously in nonprofit, and then currently the last session I've run, last group I've run was in private practice. So yes, we do have a set time. We have all these specific days that we're going to meet. So everyone is supposed to show up. and then that's the first time that we all meet. That's everyone getting on the same page, making sure everyone's on the same page at least. And what I've done specifically is I give them an overview, very quick overview, but not go so much into detail, and then get started with the character building. And then what we also have done is, though we're in a group setting, I'll individually meet with everybody just to get an idea of where everyone's at. So that's kind of my starting point.
Absolutely. I know that for my therapeutic groups, typically what I will do, whether that is with adults or with kids or with adolescents, there'll be some kind of an intake process, which means that like I'm meeting with that person one-on-one for them to have an understanding of what this is, what they're agreeing to, what we're getting into. A lot of times when we have players coming into therapeutic groups, there's a really wide range of experience. I'll have players who not only have never heard of or experienced D&D, but fantasy might not be something that they've engaged in. They might not engage in any kind of video games or board games like that. That might be a pretty foreign world for them. And so really kind of reinforcing that like you don't have to have any experience to be in my groups. I may also have players who have been playing D&D for longer than I was alive. And so we have to have conversations about like, what kind of GM am I? What edition are we playing? What does that look like around the table?
Whether they hate it or not.
Exactly. And so oftentimes that will happen as like, as a one-on-one kind of conversation. We'll talk a little bit about character building as well. I run my players through a modified character creation. I'll basically give them a menu of options, and then I will create the character for them, unless they want to create their own character, in which case they can. But then when we meet when we meet as a group, I will start people with playing. I find that especially with newer players, it is really hard to talk about what you want in a game and what you don't want in a game and what you feel comfortable with and you don't feel comfortable with if you've never played. Even if you have some experience with video games, right? Like D&D, if you can like imagine it in your head, you can at least try and make it happen in the world. And that can create this giant kind of scary sandbox.
I usually address that in my session zeros too. I tell people like, I don't expect you to have all the answers. And if I ask you how you do something and you give me a blank stare, I'll probably say something like, do you think your character would do this or this? And that's not to tell you how to play your character. It's to give you some options. And if you don't like any of those options, but you can think of a third option, then tell me the third option. It's, you don't have to pick A or B, pick C, pick Z. I don't care. And if you're like, I don't know, I just don't know, I'll come back to you. That's part of this. You're still going to be involved even if you don't have the answer right then. That kind of thing.
So we've talked a little bit about kind of talking about how you GM, right? So how are you as a game master? What kind of game are you playing? Is this going to be a combat heavy game? Is this going to be an intrigue heavy game? Is this going to be a puzzle heavy game? When you're meeting, what the expectations are around that. Are there any other things that you think are really important topics that you would consider like session zero content, whether you cover them in a session zero, whether you cover them in an outside setting?
We do like a yes/no list. So it's so I reach out to all of my players ahead of time to be like, are you available on this day at this time every week forever? Do you want to play D&D with me? I'm a storytelling GM. Cool. Everybody agrees. I'm going to ask you for a private yes/no list, and then I'm going to smash it all together because everybody gives me one, and then we're going to all agree on it as a party. And the yes/no list is things you want in the game and things you don't want in the game. So an example of things you want in the game is I would like there to be queens instead of kings. Cool. Things you don't want in the game, entire races of people being evil. Stuff like that. And I include my own stuff in there that I don't want to do. And when we agree on it as a group, that means the group is acknowledged that we're going to avoid doing something that would be upsetting to somebody. And that's something I always do in a session zero, and I regularly update it as well.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
I think what I've started to do, well, I've been doing it, I should say, is assessments, having some form of a simple assessment and a questionnaire, just to get some insight beforehand, right? Before they really delve into the adventure, to see where their mindset is. And then, once we're towards the end, wrapping up the group itself and then having a post questionnaire, to see what's changed. So I found that to be really helpful. Just getting to see where are they coming from, what is their perspective on all of this, and what do they hope to gain. That's something that's been really important and helpful.
Absolutely. I think especially for therapeutic games of any kind, right? If this is a therapy, if you're engaging in mental health treatment, you probably have some goals. Those goals don't necessarily have to be really well formulated. You don't have to go in. Oftentimes people will say, I want to feel better, or I want to communicate better, or I want to like stop being angry all the time. But you should be able to work with whoever your provider is to talk about what those goals can be generally. For kids, sometimes they may not have explicit goals, but their parents or guardians might have goals, or might be able to talk about some things that have been challenging, right? Maybe they're having a really hard time getting along in school. Maybe they're having a really hard time concentrating. Maybe they're having a hard time making friends. Maybe they're getting bullied. And so having an understanding of both the general goals of your group as well as the individuals can be really, really beneficial as you're thinking through and planning out your games. On the like social fun side of it, I'm not going to therapize my friends. I'm not going to do that. It's sounds awful and is also unethical on so many levels. But I still want to have an understanding of what people are trying to get out of the game. So I'm not going to give someone an assessment to figure out like what anxiety and depression symptoms they're popping on. But I may ask them questions about what they're hoping to get out of the game, how long they're hoping to play. Shona, I know that you did this with a game I was in. Part of our kind of session zero was like, hey, we're going to play through this adventure. And then at the end of that adventure, we're going to decide if we want to keep going. And we're going to decide if that's something that we want, if it's something that we're able to do because of our schedule. So I think setting the stage, and you did this you did a really, really good job of this, of we may get to the end of this adventure and you might want to continue, but your life doesn't let you. And that's okay. And so setting the expectations around things like that, like what is the length of this campaign, is something that can be really valuable for your players. And that's something you're also going to do in treatment, right? If this is a 10-week session, but you have the option to extend that, it's important for people to know at the outset, to have an idea. And a lot of this revolves around consent, right? We want people to have informed consent, which means I am actually aware of what I'm agreeing to. If I start this game thinking that it's going to be, combat light and role play heavy, and it is the opposite of that, and I have a really bad time, that doesn't mean I'm being a bad player. That means that there was a miscommunication.
Exactly.
And so it's really important to kind of talk about that, especially because you're often... Go ahead.
No, you finish.
Yeah. So you're often playing games with your friends. You do not want a D&D campaign to destroy your friendships.
No. So one of the things that I think you bring up there is, if I may, is you got to set up lines of communication. If a player has feedback for you, you want that right away. You don't want to wait until the next time the GM decides to do another session check-in. And so I try to, in the session zero, set up like, if you have a problem with something I'm doing, can't read your face, autistic, so write it down or get me on the phone. Please share that. I'll know you're trying to be objective, and I'll try not to take it personally, and I'll make changes. I also encourage them to talk to each other, so they have their own PC channel that I'm not privy to usually, which I just realized I have to recreate. Yeah. And then they can talk amongst themselves. That means that they have a safe place to talk to each other. I also encourage smaller subsets of the groups when they come up via play, as like, maybe you two should talk about that offline. But I always try and give an avenue of feedback, right? Like you pick away. You can send me an email. I'll make sure I sync with you every 2 weeks, something, so that there's always a check-in. That one I've always done, but there are other things that, I've learned, right? Like session zero, my very first campaign didn't have a session zero. I didn't know what it was at the time. I cobbled it together for my second game when I first started hearing about it. But I think that's an important thing to acknowledge as well, is yes, this is a good recording. Watch this, good tips. But we're all learning this too, and we're gonna keep learning this. I think I'm looking forward to. I learn something every time I talk to you all about this kind of thing.
And it's something that is it's gonna be different depending on the group that you're in, right?
Yeah, that's true.
I would say like the biggest mistake that I hear about when we're having these conversations with people, or the biggest like pitfall people can fall into, is like, oh well, I've been playing games with my friends for years, and I know these people really well, so it'll be fine. right? But
No.
if you are great at communication, like that's awesome. I'm great at communication. My husband is also a psychologist. Our degrees are literally in communication. Does that mean that we're always the best at communicating with each other? No, it does not. So even the best of us kind of need, it's really helpful to have a framework to set those expectations of like, what happens when I do get really pissed off, or I do get really sad, or I do get really frustrated, or like, we're going to talk about troubleshooting in a minute here. Like, having an understanding about like what are the correct channels to go through can be really helpful. It does not have to be this like contract that you and your friends all sign. Yeah. It can be, but it doesn't have to be.
No, and I think it's important that if you've got somebody that definitely needs rules, give them rules. Mm-hmm. Like if in a session 0 they're like, just tell me what to do, tell them what to do, and try and foster, you know, some where they can make some decisions. But I don't know how to say this. If your party is all friends offline and they all have a fight right before they show up at your table, that can lead to some very interesting gameplay, which isn't always super fun. And then it becomes your responsibility somehow as a GM to mitigate that, which I think leads us into the how to triage stuff. Or
should we jump into some troubleshooting questions?
Sure.
Okay. Yeah. Let's jump into so like these are some questions that I have pulled from kind of other trainings that we've done, as well as panels that have addressed these kinds of topics in the past. So the first one, which I think has to do with, it's like I'm pretty sure my players are really mad at each other, but like no one's copping to the fact that they're mad at each other. Like, what the heck do I do with that? Like, we set up this whole great session 0, and we said that we were going to talk when we were mad at each other, but now everybody is mad, and nobody's talking about it. What do you do?
Well, I've been doing a lot of the talking, so I'm going to make it easy.
I'm trying to think back. I think there was a particular session that we had, Elizabeth.
Are you talking about the divining rod session?
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I'm thinking back to that one. So I think from what I recall, it's just like confronting it, right? Confronting the issue and just bringing it up and let's talk about it.
Yeah, so we did it, and again, this was a therapeutic game that we were running together, so I would not necessarily recommend that you do this with your friends, but we had, it was a group of girls that every time they would start getting frustrated with each other, they would just like split the party. They were like, oh, I'm mad at you, so I just won't talk to or interact with you, and that will fix the problem, right? Spoiler alert, it doesn't fix the problem.
No, it doesn't.
Yeah.
But I wasn't just going to say like, oh man, y'all have to like fix it, because that's the antithesis of everything I am as a therapist. So what we did was we, narratively, Bhavika and I worked together to create this divining rod where they were looking for these magical pieces of this magical staff that had been broken apart and hidden by a wizard. But he had this magical divining rod. It was this stick that could like basically magically sniff out the pieces of the rod, but there was only one of them. And so like they couldn't make any forward progress in the story unless they worked together.
Yeah.
And so what that meant was they worked together, and then they got more and more frustrated with each other until one of them was willing to say that out loud. Now, the reason I wouldn't necessarily recommend this for a friend game, right, is when adults get more and more mad at each other and then explode and they're just friends and there's not this contract that we're going to sit down and we're going to talk about our feelings, and sometimes this is going to be hard, right? Like again, we're thinking back to the purpose, right? The purpose for me was not to sit down. I wanted them to realize that like just trying to split up or just not talking about it is not actually going to fix the problem. Yeah. And I knew these kids well enough where I understood the cues that they were giving me in terms of their ability to tolerate the distress that they were under, right? So I was able to modulate what was happening in the environment, consistent with the verbal and nonverbal cues they were giving me about how okay they were doing. I also had a co-DM where if we needed to like have someone step out because they needed a couple of seconds,
Yeah.
I had another therapist in the room with me. I also was able to use, Bavika was playing an NPC at the time, and so her character was able to model things, right? Her character was able to ask questions about what was going on and stuff like that, and so we were able to kind of address that. But that's something, again, that was part of a specific therapeutic intervention. It's not what I would have done with my friends.
Okay, so I am not a therapist. When this happens at my table, what it depends on the people, and also depends on if I notice, because as aforementioned, autistic, and so I don't always tell when people get angry at each other. And in fact, recently, two of my players, the characters wailed on each other. They got into a huge fight. One of them almost died, and I basically spent the entire time being like, I trust them both, I trust them both, I trust them both, I trust them both. And then as soon as we were done with the session, I was like, are you guys okay? But I could do that with them. There have been times where it came to my attention that some players were mad at each other, not the characters, and I realized a good tool to use would be to, if any player ever plays their character angry or upset, it's worth setting up the habit of pinging them afterward, or even on a break. Like if a player plays somebody like super upset, let's do a bio break, and then I'll ping them and I'll be like, how you doing? Is this good? And I'm specifically looking for, is the player upset or is the character upset? And is the player okay with the character being upset, or do I need to fix this? And once I have that set up as a habit, then you get a bunch of false positives, right? So they'll act upset, and I'll ping and be like, how we doing? And they'll be like, no, I'm good. The character's upset, but I'm enjoying playing a character upset. Cool, great. Let me know if that changes. Because I've set that up, when they're actually upset, when the player's upset, and I ping them and I go, hey, you upset? And they're like, I am upset. Be like, great. I've already set up the mechanic that I'm going to help them with this, because so it's not a guessing game for me. Every time somebody starts yelling in a game, I get to ask if they're okay. I don't know if that tool works for everybody, but any autistic GMs out there, try it. It helps.
Well, and I think having that. Sorry, go ahead.
Sorry. The other thing I want to say is I've been noticing lately that some people have been asking me, like, to be a GM, do I have to be good at people? Do I have to solve conflicts? Do I have to resolve adults fighting like in real life? Is that my job? What if I don't want to do that? What if I just want to tell a cool story? And what I've told those people is, if you think you're walking into a group where they're going to get into a lot of fights, maybe don't run that group. If this is something that really concerns you, what I would recommend is setting up a very strong expectations at the beginning. That expectation being, I'm not going to be able to solve problems for y'all in real life if you get into a fight. And if you can find a group that would be willing to let you play like that, you will. There would definitely be. When that comes up, if they're fighting in real life, you can be like, folks, I notice you're doing this. We don't have the tools to handle it at this table. How about we take a break? Maybe y'all go talk about it. And you can come at it from a different angle where it isn't your exact, responsibility. I think it's important to not let that fester at the table. But if you're not up for the confrontation, you can mitigate that by setting up the expectations before any confrontation is necessary. That's not something that you'll get involved in. Does that make sense?
Mm-hmm. I think you also bring up a really good point. Like, I think oftentimes the GM becomes responsible for the whole group. And while that absolutely is going to be true in therapeutic games, like, I am the therapist in the room, I am responsible for what's happening in that room at that time. It is okay, right, when you're setting boundaries, and I'm going to ask y'all kind of what are some of the boundaries that you maybe set as a GM, both personal and professional. It is okay to say, like, this is what I see as my responsibility as a GM. This is what I see as not my responsibility as the GM. It's my responsibility as the GM to, for example, when I GM games for friends, it is my responsibility to, like, set up the story, to talk to you about characters. If you don't understand how characters work, then I can help you build them. But, like, if you're someone who's played a lot, like, you are responsible for the maintenance of your character. You're responsible for updating your character sheet. You're responsible for bringing that to the table. You're responsible for keeping notes if you want them, because I'm not going to remember what magical items I gave you. And if they're not on your sheet, then they don't exist anymore, right? So those are some boundaries that I can set. Obviously, for the therapeutic games, I generally manage my character sheet. But for games for friends, I don't. Part of that conversation can also be, like, as the GM, Are you the one who's responsible for setting the time? Are you the one who's responsible for rescheduling if someone cancels? Or is that someone else's job in the group? Are you responsible for snacks? Are you responsible for hosting? I realize that we're not doing anything in person right now. Are you
there are many GMs that are doing this whole like everybody's going to order the same snack on the day of. So yeah, it's still relevant.
And also questions like, okay, are you meeting through Discord? Who is responsible for that? If you're a GM who likes to be responsible for all of the things and you want that kind of control at your table, that's awesome. You're going to find players who love that and just want to show up at a table. I am definitely one of those players. But if you say, you know what, I want to get into GMing, but I don't think that I want the responsibility of 5 or 4 other or 6 other adult human beings, that's okay. You should be able to say, it's not my responsibility to deal with conflict. I will say that it's happening and I will tell you that I am uncomfortable and I will ask you to handle it like adults.
Yeah, I think that's really fair.
So what are some of the boundaries that y'all set as GMs, either therapeutic GMs or for fun social games?
One of the things I set is I can't tell when people get angry. So if you're mad about something and you don't feel like you can talk to me about it, then we have a problem. You have to be able to tell me that you're upset, because I will literally never know and it'll just get worse. Just don't do it. I have had players say that I don't want to play with you, and I've said that's great, that's fine. Another boundary that I set is nobody's allowed to yell at me in real life. That takes all my spoons, and I don't like it. Another boundary that I set is if you're going to be late, you have to tell me, because it freaks me out when people don't show up to a session. I had somebody not show up for an entire session once, and I spent the entire session convinced they had died. I disasterized, so that's another boundary I set. I do a lot of the storytelling stuff. I don't usually, if somebody's like, I want to play an evil character, then I have a conversation with them about what evil is. I actually had that conversation earlier today with a new character, a new player. I don't put up with harassment of any kind. If you're joining this game so that you can go beat up a specific class of person that you want to imagine for yourself in this game, I'm not playing that game. If you want to use this as a place to get out some anger, right? Like if you're going to come to the session angry and you want to play angry, I'd like to know ahead of time, because I'll give you stuff to punch. I'll totally do it. But if you show up, you don't tell me these things, and you're going to spend a session tiptoeing around social situations, and that's what I expect the group to want to do, and you want to punch people, it's helpful to me to know that ahead of time. So I usually do a check-in with my group to see how everyone's doing, and they know that I'll do this. I stream, or I run my games the same day every week at the same time. And if we can't do that time that week, then we don't play that week. And it's not a mean thing. It's I have to have a schedule or I get really unbalanced equilibrium-wise. So that sounds like a lot of rules, and I have like a billion more. So now I'm wondering if maybe I have too many rules.
Well, it sounds like you've already talked about how you're someone who does really, really well with structure, right?
I do.
And so that's part of the kind of GM that you are, right? And I will say that as someone who's played in your campaigns, I am less structured than you are, but it's really nice to have that structure to fall back on, because it's always there if I need it, right? What is happening and how things are going to go is very predictable, but it's not constraining.
I always get consent for that too. And I've had players come to me after they've consented and been like, I don't like that we play the same day every week. Can we change it up? And I investigate that as a conversation of like, does that time just not work for you? Or do you just want chaos in your damn life? And if they're like, I need the chaos, be like, cool, I can help you find another game.
What about you, Viveka? Are there any boundaries that you set either as a therapeutic GM or as a player GM for social games?
So I'll start with, because I've had the opportunity to just play for fun, I prefer not having any responsibilities. But I like the structure. I like to just sit back and not worry about anything else. But obviously, when you're facilitating in a therapeutic setting, it's different. So at that point, there's quite a bit of responsibility. For me, organization is a big deal. Having structure in place, being really focused on time, that's a very big deal. One of the other things that I take very seriously is ground rules. So being able to have, from the start, look, respect is very important. What does that look like? Kind of doing a little bit of psychoeducation regarding ground rules. Chances are the kiddos, yeah, and the chances are like kiddos, they're going to talk over each other, but they're going to learn through that process, right? If it's not me, usually the other peers might point it out like, hey, you're talking over that person or something along those lines. So ground rules, also being able to have, it's a therapeutic setting, so it's a safe place for people. So having that in place for clients, and obviously having a space for myself too. If I need like a minute to myself, if I find myself getting a little frustrated or something's coming up for me, what I've started to do is I'll give them a puzzle or a riddle to work on, and that's going to be a little time for me to just stay quiet and just observe. So that's been really helpful. Just having, that's the beauty of this game. Like you can just throw in things for them to do, and you can kind of just take a step back for a little bit. So that's been really important, setting that type of boundary. And then also having a boundary in the sense, when it comes to communication, that there's a way to communicate with one another, especially me being the therapist. I'm not a friend or someone you can just like talk to a specific way. So making sure that they understand that too. And ensuring and letting them know that this is their safe place. And if they need to talk or pull me over to the side, that it's possible as well. So those are some of the things that I've kind of put into place.
How about you, Elizabeth?
For me, I think I've talked about this a little bit, but like having clear guidelines around like communication. I don't do sex in my games. I don't. I don't want to. You can. That's cool. Yeah. I think that clear communication, those clear expectations around like what is going to happen. And the way that I really like to think about this is session 0 and the safety tools, like, and I say session 0, like all of the like general safety tools and stuff that we're talking about. In an ideal world, you're going to set them up, you're going to set it, and you're going to forget about it. Not forget about it as in don't use it, but it is, I realize that we keep talking about like more and more rules and things that you should be adding to your game, but it doesn't create this unwieldy game. The idea is that it actually creates this really, really strong foundation, right? It's almost like the stage manager and all of the tech hands that are running around behind a show so that the show itself gets to be big and exciting and awesome. And if you want to have a really cool, really long running Broadway show, you have so many people that are doing the behind the scenes stuff. Every time you want to add like live fire on the stage or something that rotates or something that dances, you've got to have more support for that. And I think about that in the same way in terms of games, right? If you want to start doing things like really graphic violence, or you want to handle sex, or you want to handle other topics that might make people really uncomfortable, you can do that if you have the right support and you have the right consent, right? Which means that like someone can say, you know what? Yeah, I'm okay with like really graphic death, or I'm terrified of spiders, but I am okay with them in this game. But you have to be able to have the ability to step back from that. So that's where safety tools like X cards come in. So people do X cards different ways. It's just one example of safety tools where it might be something where you literally like make an X. You might have a card that you flip over on the table. You can do other things virtually, but it basically says like, depends on what it says depends on the game that you're in, but it might mean I'm going to take a step back, or I need the topic to change immediately, or I need this to look differently. I need us to take a break. So setting that then allows you to push some of those boundaries if you want to try something that might be outside of people's comfort zones. Are there any other safety tools that y'all use?
Well, I think I'm really glad you brought that up because I realized I left it off mine. But the safety tools are really important, and I set it up even when I've said I'm not going to do any of the tricky stuff, because I don't always know what might be tricky for some people.
And your players might not either. They might be like, "Oh, I'm fine with this," and all of a sudden we're in the middle of this, and I'm not fine with this anymore.
If they're not fine with it, yeah. So I also, because we're doing this all online, what I'll do is I set up private channels with each of them. And I pay attention to the channels. And if anybody has and needs a break of any kind, like I have to let the dog out all the way up to I have to go cry in a corner, they have a way to do that, either in a way that they feel comfortable. And then the way that I respect that is I tell, if we're streaming or if it doesn't matter where we are, I say, we're going to do a bio break. And then I ping the person. I'm like, how much time do you need? And if they can't tell me, I'll be like, cool, I'm going to give you 15. I'll check back in. And if they're like, yeah, I need the night, I'll be like, cool, you're going to drop off. And I'm going to go back and say, hey, so-and-so had to drop off. We're going to keep going. I'm just going to pilot their character. And I set that up with them ahead of time so that it's not suddenly in this crisis mode where I'm getting panic messages from somebody being like, I hate it. Or somebody in the middle of a session being like, I'm out, and running away. Like, you set that up ahead of time. I think that's important. It can be simple. It can be a card. It could be a channel. It could be a secret phone number. It could be a safe word. It could be anything you want that you agree on together.
You agree on.
Yes. I've actually done something similar. What I've started to do is I keep sticky notes with me, and I'll give them out during the beginning before we even start the adventure. I'll always, every session, I'll give them a stack of like sticky notes to the kiddos. And if they have something they want to say to me and they just don't want to like say it out loud, write it down and just pass the sticky note over to me. So I'm in the loop of what's going on with them. They might not always feel comfortable saying, hey, I need to talk to you right now. Can we just like pause for a second? So I think being able to have a sticky note and just being able to have that form of communication helps. And there are times when we do take a break halfway through. If they want to step aside and talk at that point, then it's fine. But something simple like sticky notes has been really helpful so far.
I love that. Yeah, with our online games, the platform we do our Game to Grow games through allows for private chatting as well, and so people can chat, like people can message me directly if they need something, or there's something they're not comfortable with, which I think is really important. Having those, and then also having it normalized, right? Because if you have an X card, but no one has ever used an X card, and you're worried that using an X card is going to ruin everyone else's game, you're not going to use that unless you are like way beyond not okay.
Right. Which is not what you want. Yeah, I normalize it a bunch. I usually go over it in session zeros too, to be like, people have done this. I have done this. This is what it looked like. There was no terrible big bad. We were able to get through it together. That's why we use this. If you have suggestions, please let me know.
And you're going back to those goals of, right, like our goals are to get together to have fun. These safety tools are not because people are just like weak, vulnerable snowflakes. These safety tools are because we are all adults or we are kids and we want to be able to get together and have a good time. And we're going to get to be more creative and silly and ridiculous and engaged in this like immersive story building world if we feel safe and comfortable. If I know, right? Because if I want to do something that is wild and ridiculous, I want to make sure that everybody else around the table is either going to feel comfortable with that, or they're going to tell me when they're not. Because otherwise I might do less cool stuff because I'm worried it might hurt somebody. And that's not good for anybody.
Frankly, I like playing in D&D more because there are all of these like agreements that people will tell me if they're upset. And I don't get that in real life, and it's kind of frustrating. So I play a lot of D&D.
We talk about like one of the most I don't know, there's so many valuable things about this as an intervention. I can talk about it all day long. But one of the things that I can be really, really helpful for is creating this environment that is very much a social environment, but is also a more structured environment than just like meeting at a restaurant or a bar with someone, or just like trying to make friends, whatever that looks like. Having unstructured social interactions is incredibly difficult for a lot of people. It's difficult for people on the spectrum. It's difficult for people with anxiety and depression. It's difficult for people
ADHD, bipolar disorder.
It's also difficult for people who are switching experience. For all of the people, right? I work with a lot of veterans, and it can
Somebody
be
who had a bad day. Like, why do we do it?
So what we're learning is no unstructured social interactions, but especially like if you're transitioning out of something, right? Like you're transitioning from school to life, if you're transitioning from the military to the civilian side, all of the rules that we don't ever actually talk about that very much exist in all of our communications with other human beings that's really challenging. It's really, really hard to switch from like, okay, well, my life was really structured and someone told me what to do and this is how I interacted with someone. And when someone said this, they meant this. Think about any conversation that you've tried to have with your in-laws or someone from a different area or someone from a different background from you. When my mother says she's fine, it means something very different than when my husband says he's fine, because my husband means he's fine. But that was hard for us to figure out because we're coming from different, we all have these different rules. And so using these kind of session zero techniques is a way for us to all get more on the same page. So we've only got a couple of minutes left, but I'm wondering that for anyone who's been watching this and is like, oh my gosh, I definitely need to be doing this, but this seems really overwhelming. There's so many different things that I should be implementing, and I guess I should create a whole new Discord server now. What would be your advice for someone who's just starting out either as a GM or is just starting out as a player or has been GMing or playing for a while and thinks, you know what, it might actually be really helpful to implement some of these things? Any advice?
Start with what kind of story you want to tell, and you can kind of go from there. If you figure out what kind of story you want to tell, then communicate it to the group you want to play with. If playing at the exact same time every week is important, make that important. If you want everybody to wear the color blue, make that important. So figure out what's important to you and then have a conversation with your players about it. That's all a session zero really is figuring out what's important to you, what's important to them, and having a conversation about that. That can take any form you want. You can do it in lots of channels. You can do it in email. You can do it through snail mail. I've seen people do that. You can I don't care how you do it. That's all you really need to do is sit down and collaborate on what your goals are together. And I know that sounds silly for a game, but frankly, I do it with board games too. And it does help. I really think it does.
Yeah, I think for me, being able to explore. Now, I might not always have my thoughts put together, so what I usually do is just go on the net, look up stories, and try to get some inspiration. So I think that really helps. And just like what you both have been saying, I think communication is such a big deal in this. Being able to, I know I struggle with anxiety, so I might be a little nervous to point out an idea or suggest something, but this is like an open space, so this is the best way for me to work on, like, hey, I want to just hint this a little bit. So being able to explore what's on the net, tap into those resources, expand my creativity and imagination, be able to communicate that with the other players, and in a therapeutic setting, I guess, do a lot of research, connect with people. I think networking is a really big deal. And something, Elizabeth, that you've taught me is watch the games, see how it's played by different groups of people.
Out there, yeah.
Mm-hmm. Observations, just watching, you can gain so much and get different ideas. So I would definitely encourage that.
Absolutely. And Viveka, like you mentioned, there are tons of resources around like session zero and consent checklists online. I find that open yes/no lists can be really challenging for new players, or even players who've been playing for a while, but they've played a particular kind of game and maybe we're doing something different. So that
things like most people assume I don't deal with certain things at this point, but it's nice to write it all down.
Yeah. And so there are like checklists online that you can then have your players look through that. And they might be like, well, obviously you're not going to do that. So I never thought about writing it on the no list, but now it's in this form. And so it takes some of the guesswork out of it. It also takes some of the effort off of kind of your lap as the GM. I think for me, the biggest things that I hope that you take away from today's panel are that session zero and safety tools are going to be an ongoing process. And they should be a collaborative ongoing process. This is not you as the GM who has the sole responsibility for making sure everyone around the table has a good time. Because you are a player at that table too. Your role looks different, but that does not mean that you are single-handedly responsible for everyone's experience. And it should be collaborative, right? We've talked about things like X cards. Bavika uses sticky notes. I use people talking to me in chat. There's also like lines and veils. There are other safety tools. It's important for you to find what works for your group. Because like I mentioned before, if you have X cards, but no one is actually willing to use them, you don't have X cards. You're not using them. So kind of talking about those things on an ongoing process. And I will say it might be uncomfortable to talk about this at the beginning, especially if you've had a group that's been running for a while and you haven't talked about it before. Being uncomfortable does not mean that it is bad. Sometimes it means that you are growing and you are becoming stronger as a group and as a person. And that sounds super cliche, but I have gone to school for an extra like 10 years just so I can tell you that. So I want you to walk away from this panel.
I'll tell you that too, man. I didn't go to school for it. It's damn true. You know, and we call it a session 0 a lot, but I recommend you sync with your players pick a cadence. I usually do it, Broken Bane, we're doing it usually at the end of every arc, kind of. Another group I have to put something on my calendar because it just there isn't a natural break. So have regular like dot sessions and be like, all right, this session we're just going to talk about how we're all doing and stuff. I think it's good to build in that time to go over stuff.
And honestly, while we're all trapped at home right now, like having those more informal sessions might just be really nice as well.
I had a session where I'd lost my map or something, and we all got online, and I was like, discombobulated, and they were like, I was like, how about you guys just talk about what each of your characters thought about the goings on over the last couple sessions, and they were like, okay, and they got a kick out of it. Now they want me to do it all the time.
Oh, that's awesome.
There you go.
Yeah,
you could find more fun things for your group to do. There you go. I love it.
So there's different ways you can do that.
Well, thank you so much for coming to our talk today, everyone. We hope that you learned something. If you have opinions, you're welcome to contact at least me. So you can find me online at Drs. Kilmer on Twitter. I'm there sometimes. You can also, again, find me at Game to Grow. If you are interested in getting training, you're interested in joining a group, Game to Grow offers groups worldwide for adults, adolescents, and children. And we also offer training services. If you're interested in any of that, I would highly recommend that you sign up for our newsletter. If you let us know what you're interested in, we will do our best not to spam you and only give you things that you care about. Where can everybody find y'all?
For me, the best way to contact me is at my email, which is my first name, BHAVIKA @uplift-counseling.com. And that's to inquire about counseling services, specifically for D&D groups. Or if you have any other questions related to D&D, you can definitely reach out to me. So that's the best way to reach out.
And I'm online as like 7 Spoon, all spelled out. The numbers all spelled out. You can find me. I stream on Tuesdays, Saturdays, and Sundays. And sporadically on other days at twitch.tv/like7spoon. I am heavily on Twitter, so you can that's the best way to contact me is on Twitter. I'll answer questions about anything we talked about today, and if you just glance at my Twitter, you can see other stuff I'll talk about. I'm also, as I mentioned, the Game to Grow volunteer coordinator. We are accepting interest in volunteer opportunities, and you might be thinking, we're trapped in our houses. And I'm here to tell you, yeah, we thought of that. And we're trying to find ways to use volunteers anyway. So reach out, and maybe I'll ping you back. But yeah, Game to Grow is another good way to find.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much for being on this panel with me, y'all. And goodbye, everybody on the internet.
Bye, Stream.
Thank you.